All right, welcome everybody. We are live right now. So if you are logged in or listening to us live on one of our platforms, why don't you give me a comment, make sure that the audio's okay before we get started here. I am not the savviest person with technology, so I just want to make sure that everybody that is on can hear okay, that the audio and the video is coming through for you folks. Thank you, Roman. I appreciate that. We are going to give it a couple more minutes for a few more people to log in, and we're going to get started here. I know your guys' time is valuable, and I am in Pacific Standard Time, so it's not quite as late as it is for some of you folks on the other coast. So I want to be mindful of your time. So we're going to get started. We'll also record this. So if any of you have friends, family, coworkers want a recording of this, we will definitely have that available for you. And I believe we will also put that up on our YouTube channel. So my name is Heather Dreves. I'm going to get going here just to, again, to be mindful of your time. If you guys are having any audio issues or anything like that, just let us know. We'll do our best to troubleshoot that. But we're going to get going. So Happy New Year. I think, I don't know about you guys, but personally, this is a good time to reflect on, the past year, what worked, and also start thinking about, and a lot of you probably started this before the new year even started, but starting about the new year, going into it with a plan. And we're going to specifically be talking today about, how different investment strategies that may come from some alternative investments like what we offer here at Central Lending may fit into your guys' portfolio. Although I am not an attorney, so for those of you folks on here, I'm going to just read a real quick disclosure, and then we're going to get started. This will keep our legal team happy. Again, this presentation is provided for educational and informational purposes only. It's not intended to constitute any kind of financial, investment, legal, or tax advice. Myself nor Central Lending is acting as a financial advisor. Central Lending does not provide financial advice. I'm not a licensed financial advisor, and nothing contained in this presentation should be construed as a recommendation, solicitation, or an offer to buy or sell in a security or investment product. So any investment decisions, as always, should be made only after consulting with your licensed financial advisor, tax professional, legal counsel, or other qualified person who can evaluate your individual circumstances. So all investments involve risk, and past performance is not indicative of future results. So now that we have that boring stuff out of the way, let's get started here. So first, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about, why planning matters at the start of the year. We're going to talk about the three pillars of income, or the three pillars, income, growth, and stability. We're going to talk a little bit how to balance a portfolio intentionally based off of your strategies and your goals. And we're going to talk about where alternative investments may fit into your portfolio, some common mistakes investors make, and then really just a simple framework, how you can apply these things to your 2026 investment strategies. So, a couple things about being intentional, and I know this word is thrown out there a lot, and especially over the last year or two, you hear about living your life intentionally, being intentional. It is actually something I've been thinking a lot about, not only in my professional life, but as well as in my personal life, just being, more intentional with my time, more intentional with different, aspects of my life, whether that's professionally or personally. But a few things about being intentional. What does that mean? At least to me, that means, really being intentional about anything that I'm doing, whether it's in my free time. One of the things my husband and I really leaned into over the last 12 months, and I'd really like to grow in, is our faith, and being intentional about it. We hadn't been up until about 12 months ago. And so we're being more intentional with that. We're being more intentional with our free time. What does that look like? Are we spending that with people that don't make us better people, or are we spending this time with people that help us grow as individuals, as a husband and wife, as a mom and dad, being intentional with my time at work. I think last year I probably went into the weeds a little too far, but um, it was not a bad use of time. Central Lending had huge growth last year, and we have some amazing people we've brought on board and new leaders in the company that I think will allow me not to be in the weeds. And so this year, I'd like to be more intentional about the time that I spend professionally looking on or working on higher level things that help grow Central Lending. So some of the things though to think about, from an investment perspective is, what are unintentional portfolios? What kind of unnecessary risk are they creating? So a lot of portfolios grow by default, not by design. I think most of you probably out there have some kind of a retirement account, whether that's a 401k, pensions really aren't a thing anymore, but the majority of the time with those 401k employer sponsored accounts, you don't really have a lot of say in them. You might at the beginning set it up and make some kind of an assessment with the 401k planner about where you're at in your investment cycle, right? Are you younger and you're more growth minded? Are you a little bit older and you have a different strategy? But majority of the time, once you choose that path, it's just kind of by default. I can tell you that my 401k that I had, I didn't really look at a lot. I mean, I looked at it probably once a year when the 401k planner came into the firm and talked to us about that. But a lot of it was not necessarily because I designed it that way. A lot of times overexposure to market volatility leaves investors vulnerable. They may have a good experience and then they start heavily investing in that market. I've seen that happen. I've seen that in different investor communities. I think, when you have a decent experience and you start to trust someone, we all get a little lackadaisical and not checking on our investments and things like that. That is something, in my opinion, that can leave you very vulnerable. Income gaps emerge in retirement or near retirement years. And emotional decision making during market swing leads to poor outcomes. I talk to a lot of investors, and again, I don't give financial advice, but they get really emotional about it. And I've actually told some of my investors, you have to leave the emotion out of this, and especially in private lending. We're gonna not get too far in the weeds with private lending, but I have some lenders that that have done lending themselves or have bought notes from me in the past, and they get really emotional, like, why is this guy not paying? He signed a promissory note, he agreed to pay, and now he's not paying. And they let their emotions get the best of them instead of looking at the situation and making a decision, for what's best for their investment at that time. So emotional decision definitely can make poor outcomes during market swings for sure. So I like to remind people, leave the emotion out of it. This is an investment. Make decisions based on what's best for your investment dollars. 3 questions that I really believe every investor should answer, when making decisions about where they're putting their dollars. And I've talked to a lot of my clients about this. I get these clients that will call me and say, I was on a webinar, I was on a podcast, or I'm in a community with a bunch of investors that are in the same profession as me. And, they're getting 15 to 20% returns and yada, yada, yada. And I'm going to put money here. And I a lot of times will ask them, does that investment align with what your ultimate end goal is? And many times they don't even really know what the end goal is. They just heard it's a great investment. They kind of hear these high returns, but then they don't get the specifics about it. I mean, when you're investing in alternative investments, and let's just talk specifically about debt funds, there are so many different ways operators like Central Lending can design these. You can invest in a debt fund that pays you monthly. You can invest in a debt fund that maybe pays you quarterly. Sometimes there are operators that design funds where you don't get any payments except for once a year. I get investors that don't know how they get their money back. Okay, well, how do you get your money back? When do you get your money back? Well, I didn't ask them that. And then I ask them, what kind of dollars are you looking to invest? Are these liquid funds that you have in your savings account? Are these monies that are set up in retirement accounts? When do you need access to these? So these are all things to take in consideration, because these are three just kind of initial questions that I tell a lot of couples that meet with me is like, have you guys sat down and together, or if you're not with someone, these are things you should be asking yourself is, how much income do you need? If this is an investment and these are investment dollars that are going to be creating cash flow for you, how much income do you really need? Do you have income coming in from other resources? Do you have retirement accounts? Do you have, we all talk about Social Security. Who knows if it will be there when I'm ready to retire? And it looks like the presentation might have popped off. I want to make sure everybody can still see that. So please let me know if you cannot see the PowerPoint. There we go. So that's something to think about. How much income do I actually need? What is your outgoing nut that you are paying? And do you want to continue to live that lifestyle? There are some people, and I would probably say that's me. I want to continuing the lifestyle that I've become accustomed to. Some people aren't interested in that. They're okay downsizing and, scaling down, but you need to have that conversation with yourself or with your spouse. How much income do you really need? And then you can back into some of these investments. I have clients that only want to invest in things that they get monthly income, because this is how they continue to live this lifestyle. So those are conversations to have. If you're more growth minded, what does that growth look like? Are you on a 10-year plan? Are you younger and you've got, 25 years to work and you don't really need that? Then you could probably go into something that's a little riskier versus somebody my age at, I'm not going to put my number out there, but I'm not retiring anytime soon, but I'm much younger than much older than my colleague Cade. I might not want to take on as much risk, right? Or maybe I didn't plan and I need to be in like uber growth mode, to get to where I want to be once I do retire and want to replace my income. And then the third thing I would ask yourself is, how much risk can you realistically tolerate? All investments come with different varying scales of risk tolerance. And I think you really have to look at that and decide, how much risk can I tolerate? And then you can start assessing different alternative investments and where you might put some of your dollars. So ultimately, your allocation should reflect your life stage, not market headlines. I think there's a lot of noise out there. And I'm not saying that, obviously you're on a webinar right now. I'm not saying webinars, podcasts, and all those kind of things aren't valuable. But I do think there is a lot of noise out in this industry. And I'm happy to see that people are, and I've been doing this over 20 years. There are so many more people coming into this space trying to educate themselves about the alternatives out there. It's exciting. I also really like to see there's a lot younger generation coming into this industry, starting to deploy dollars as well. So just be mindful, proceed with caution, ask yourself these questions, and remember, that where you put your money, that really should reflect where you're at in the stage of your investment strategy. So let's talk first about income, because I feel like, at least lately, at least over the last couple of years, this has really been a focus for our investors and the majority of the people that we come into touch with, is really the first pillar. It's income. So what income investments do. So I tell people, and I'll be honest, like, I've had clients that wanted to invest with us, and they have said, I have to have this money or I cannot live on a monthly basis, this is not the investment for you. There is risk in this. There is also a lot of upside that it can provide as far as cash flow goes. But it's also something that you should not be putting all your eggs into one basket. So just keep that in mind. Diversification is still really, really important. But what income strategies can do is they can provide predictable cash flow. I think that is so true with debt funds. Keep in mind that, going into a fund structure, there are a couple different ways that you can do that. You could also be buying, notes, which would provide you with monthly cash flow. But they're very predictable. When you go into a fund, typically you're going to be either coming in as what we call an equity member, where you're part owner in the fund, you're a limited partner, and there is very clearly defined payout structures. Usually you're provided a preferred rate of return, and then you get a share in any upside once that preferred rate is split. At least this is the way our fund is structured. So you need to read the offering documents to make sure you fully understand what you're getting into. But what I tell people is like, hey, you're going to at least get the preferred rate of return, providing that fund hits that target. And at least in our fund, there's also a catch up. If we were not to meet that in the earning period, we would have to catch it up. And then the icing on the cake is you get a share in the profitability when we hit it out of the ballpark and we have a home run. So there's no limit on what you can make. There is kind of a floor. The preferred rate is the floor, right? You should be making at least that, or we're probably not the best fund operators. But if you're looking at funds like that are structured that way, what I would suggest is ask to see their track record to back that up. Or you can go into a fund where you can get a fixed rate sometimes. Like we offer a fixed rate for what we call note holders in our fund. That's very predictable. That's paid out every single month. Your earnings never change. You have a clearly defined timeline. You get a pick. Do you want to tie your capital up for 4 months, 12 months, or 24 months? That's extremely predictable. The downside is you don't get a share in the profitability of the fund. But for some investors that truly are actually wanting to create cash flow, they love that model because they know exactly what they're going to get every month, right? There's no question to it. We have one client. If anybody from Central Lending is on here, Lee is looking to get on the presentation. So if maybe somebody could reach out to him and help him. He registered for it, but he didn't get anything. So sorry on a side note, but want to make sure he's able to get onto it. So if someone could reach out to Lee, that would be great. Income can also support your lifestyle needs or reinvestment. I know lots of professionals, specifically dentists in this alternative investment space that have, worked their whole lives, built a successful practice up, they are ready to retire and pass the torch on, but they also want to continue to live the lifestyle they've come accustomed to. A lot of them will sell their practice, sell the building that their practice is in. And this goes for any business owner, or quite honestly, anybody that is working and has steady income. They get to a place where they're ready to retire, sell their business, whatever the case may be, but they want to continue to live their lifestyle. If they have put money away and built their assets up, they very easily could continue to live that lifestyle. And we say all the time, have your money work for you. That's very realistic. And I have lots of case studies I could give you of actual clients of mine that have done that. And they haven't all been dentists. I mean, they've been people that have just been good stewards of their money, and get to a place in their life where they have this nice little nest egg, and they're able to retire and they're able to stop working, but continue to live the lifestyle that they want to. This also reduces reliance on selling assets. So this is, again, kind of goes back to let your money work for you. I can give you an example of my mother-in-law. She had some money with a financial advisor, and quite honestly, he wasn't doing that great of a job for her. She never asked for our help. And when we actually started digging into it, discovered that she had pretty much depleted almost her entire nest egg she had. She thought her investment dollars were performing for her because she was getting X amount of dollars a month, not realizing that this financial advisor was actually only 50% of what he was paying her out monthly was coming from the earnings from her investment. The other 50% was coming out of her principal balance of her investment account. And now, she's in a place where she doesn't have a lot left in there. So again, be a good steward of your money. Make sure that you are monitoring your investments. You can very easily create passive income for yourself. So a couple different examples of some assets that you can actually do that with. Private credit. So you can be a lender. You can lend people money. Typically the way that you structure that is you have a piece of real estate that backs your investment. You're basically the bank. They're paying you most of the time on a monthly basis. You can structure that however you want to. And if they don't pay you, you have a piece of real estate that is an asset that you can actually foreclose on and take back from them. Fixed income alternatives, and then cash flowing real estate. We have a lot of investors that have created wealth for themselves, actually owning the real estate. But some investors are in a place where they're like, I don't want to deal with tenants and toilets anymore. I don't want that call in the middle of the night that their hot water tank quit working. Or if they were a developer, they're tired of dealing with contractors and things like that. So really just depends on how hands-on you want to be versus how passive you want to be. But the one thing I do talk a lot about, and I kind of joke about this with our fund, is, boring can be beautiful. Boring investments are okay. They're typically going to be your more reliable hands-off investments. If you're looking for those high returns, 20%, 25%, they come with some headache and risk, and there's nothing wrong with them. You just need to understand what you're getting into. 10 to 12% consistent returns are okay. And I think people have seen that over the last couple of years. Like I said, I've been doing this a while, and I've seen some operators go sideways, and they were typically the ones that have the big dog and pony show. And, I'm going to get you above 20% returns, which I always tell investors too, if it sounds too good to be true, it just might be too good to be true. So boring is not a terrible thing. And then you have growth-minded investors, and sometimes you're both. One of the things that I've discovered is I don't think you're just one or the other. I think a lot of times the different pillars also can be identified by the kind of dollars you're investing. And what I mean by that is a perfect example of investment dollars that are perfect for more of a growth-minded model is IRAs. Anybody on here have a self-directed IRA? Raise your hand, put something through on the comments. They've become very popular. These are IRA accounts where, providing they are with what is called a self-directed custodian, and I could do a whole webinar on those, you can actually pick and choose how you want to invest. You could buy a piece of real estate in your IRA, and you wouldn't have any tax implications, or they could be deferred depending upon which kind of an IRA you invest with. But IRA accounts are perfect for growth models because, as you guys know, you can't take a distribution on your IRA until you're 59 and a half. And quite honestly, even if you were 59 and a half and it was a traditional IRA, you are still going to pay some taxes on it. Now, if you were smart enough to start a Roth IRA, which they are just like so powerful. If anybody's on this presentation that's under the age of 30, if you do not have a Roth IRA, please go do that right now. If you're older, you can do Roth conversions. I'm happy to connect you with the professionals that can give you more information about this. But my point is, IRA accounts, whether they're traditional or Roth, many times you're not investing those dollars for cash flow because you don't want to be penalized for taking distributions on it. What I tell people with those types of accounts is find an investment where you can actually compound your earnings. So for example, with our fund, you can actually take your earnings and you can actually reinvest them on a monthly basis. And now you're compounding your earnings. So if you're if you've invested, over $250,000 with us, you can get a targeted fixed rate of 11%. You can reinvest those earnings on a monthly basis, run those numbers, run a calculator, a compound calculator over 5 to 10 years and look at the growth that happens. So growth-minded investments and strategies build long-term wealth over time. They typically combat inflation effectively. They increase future income potential. Some of the examples of this would be equities, equity positions in private funds, appreciation-focused real estate. I also ran another list of some different things that can actually hedge inflation. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get a little farther into the presentation, and I'm happy to share some of this information with you guys as well. But we'll keep going. We'll come back to that. But again, growth is great, and it doesn't have to be IRA dollars. I really just use that as an example because that seems to be a request we get from a lot of people that are looking for growth-minded investments. Many times they are using these self-directed types of accounts to invest, and that's one of the strategies that they typically are looking for. So we'll keep going. We can come back to this if we have some more time. Pillar 3 is stability. Preserve capital during market turbulence. Why stability matters. This is going to dampen your portfolio volatility. It preserves capital during downturns, and it allows investors to stay invested during market turbulence. Stability is about risk management, diversification, downside protection. I get a lot of investors that will call up, well, what kind of returns can you give me? I talked to so-and-so, and they said that they can get me these kind of returns. What can you guys do for me? And that's great. I think, definitely understanding what kind of returns you could potentially expect is important. But I also, if it was me, and one of the things that I look at when talking with different alternative investments and investments in general is the bigger question for me is, how are you going to preserve my capital? Are you looking at making an investment with an operator like Central Lending? What kind of questions are you asking them? Hey, how long have you guys been doing this? Who are the key players on your team? Things that would concern me and be red flags when I would be assessing an investment is an operator where, there is one person running the show. What happens if something happens to that person? Do they have the infrastructure and the resources to continue operating that fund or that investment if something were to happen to that key player? Again, track record's big for me, and I would ask for evidence of that. Don't just take their word. Great, you say that, you've always had these great returns. Well, can you show me that? I would also look at how you're secured, when you make an investment. If you're buying a note, are you being recorded as the now new lien holder when you purchase that note? I could talk for days over my 20-some years in this industry of investors that I work with that have bought notes, sometimes at REI events. They funded a deal for some local guy, trusted him to do the paperwork. They signed everything. They wired the money. The guy stops paying them, and now they're calling them saying, hey, what's going on? And realizing they have no lien against the property. So one of the things about preserving your capital is understanding who you're investing with. And I honestly think that the who is almost as important or more important than the what and the returns. Because at the end of the day, as markets shift, and they do, we've seen this, we're seeing it right now. I want to know that the person that is managing this investment in this asset is going to see it through to the end, even through the storm. So many private credit strategies are asset backed. That's one of the big things I look at, and I would probably suggest that for you guys, whether you're going into a fund or you're buying a note. And I'm just specifically talking about those things, is what is the asset that's backing it? Many times these funds and these notes are secured by real estate or hard assets. Understand, is there a clearly defined term? Every fund should have what's called an offering document, a PPM. You should clearly understand when you invest, who is the decision makers, when they report, when your earnings are paid out, and when you get your money back. It's shocking to me. I've had a lot of investors say, well, I put money with so-and-so, and I don't really know when I get my money back, but they keep paying me every month. Well, that's great, but you really still should know how you're getting paid back. So clearly defined terms are really important. Stability helps investors stay invested during downturns. There's typically less short-term fluctuation compared to public markets. It typically is going to reduce emotional and reactionary decision making, and it's going to support long-term focus during periods of volatility. So ultimately, at the end of it all, stability is about risk management, diversification, and downside protection. All right, there's no one-size-fits-all portfolio. And I would like to say there is, this isn't easy. And I think, especially in this alternative space, there are, thank goodness, some financial advisors out there that are giving great advice on this. And, if you guys are looking for some communities and a little direction, we know a couple that we'd be happy to connect you guys with that can help you, give you a blueprint. They're not giving you financial advice, but they can give you a blueprint based off of your strategy and your goals of how to get there. But again, there is not one size fits all. A lot of younger investors typically lean on more growth-minded investments. Pre-retirement investors often rebalance towards income, and then stability increases confidence and consistency. So I think you really, again, need to go back to those three questions, and ask that of yourself. And then you can back into these. And, even if you're not looking for actual advice from somebody on your strategies and your goals, there's a lot of communities out there too that can give you good advice. One of the things that I heard a long time ago is, learn from other people's mistakes, and you'd be shocked in these communities and these groups where you can hear horror stories from other people, and hopefully you don't make the same ones. But I think really, understanding what your strategies are in your end game, then you can back into this and you can put together a very nice, diversified, secure portfolio. So where do alternative investments fit in your portfolio? And why? So why do they fit? And I get a lot of people that are like, well, why would I put investment dollars in an alternative investment versus calling up my financial advisor? I think a lot of people, and there's a lot of great financial advisors out there. I'm not saying leave your financial advisor, but I am saying, and I've seen this happening, and it's really been just kind of a wave over the last couple of years of investors really taking their own destiny into their hands and looking at other investment options out there outside of your really traditional resources you guys typically have. So why does it matter? They're not typically correlated to public markets. Income potential is independent of stock performance. And most of the time, again, they are in asset-backed opportunities that provide security. I mean, I know somebody that does car loans. He works with some company that he helps provide car loans and makes really good returns on it. And the asset that's backing that is a vehicle. I'm not saying you guys should all go out there and do that. I talked to another gentleman the other day that knows an organization that does factoring. So they lend money on people's inventory and things like that. They don't do real estate. They lend on things. So some of the common alternatives are private lending. Like I said, this would be a case where you're actually the lender. You're like the bank. You are lending money. Some people do it themselves. They go to real estate investment clubs. It's interesting. Once you lend a little bit, people catch wind of it. I recently had my husband lend out of his IRA on a piece of real estate in our local market, and the people wanted to throw a cow into the deal. It was farmland. We didn't take the cow because I don't know what we would have done with it if we had to take it back, but we did that deal. I guess it's been about 2 months. These people paid 11% and 2 origination points, and they prepaid 6 months worth of interest on a small deal. I think we lent them $75,000 on a piece of land that is worth 300. In my mind, that was a pretty good deal. You know, if they don't make their payments, we can take it back, but they prepaid 6 months of interest. But again, it's an asset-backed, a real estate-backed investment. So that's private lending. You're the direct lender. The downside to that type of an investment is if people don't pay, you have to make the decision whether you want to foreclose. And to some people, that's scary. But if you're lending, you know, in an equity position like the deal we just did, we let 75, it's worth 300. Well, if I have to spend 5,000 to foreclose, I'm still coming out much farther ahead of the game. But for some people, they don't want to deal with that. So that kind of segues into private debt funds or credit funds. They're all essentially the same thing. These are funds that operators manage. So for example, Central Lending has a fund. We manage it. So we make all the decisions. You don't have to make any of those decisions, but you're relying on us as an operator to continue to make that fund profitable. And that's how your earnings are paid out. And like I said, you can come into a debt fund where you're getting a share in the fund. You're essentially a partial owner. You get a share in the profitability of the fund. Or a lot of times, but not all funds, will offer a different avenue. We offer what we call a note holder. So these are for investors that come in. They want just a fixed rate. They don't want to worry about how profitable the fund was and question what their returns are going to be. But these funds, like for example ours, are what are called debt funds. So we lend money out of them. When we lend money out of them, that asset, we are creating a loan, we are filing a lien against the property. That borrower is expected to make payments every month. The fund owns the paper on that asset. And if the borrower doesn't make the payments, the fund takes it back. So it's still a real estate backed investment, but instead of being one lender on one loan, you are in a pool with a bunch of other investors, and we are managing it and we are lending the money out. They're very common. It's, you know, a great way to still invest in notes, but not have to have some of the headaches that can come along with notes. But if you're a really hands-on kind of person and you want to look at the deals, I call them our deal junkies. We've got a handful of them. Kate can attest to this. We've got a lot of clients that like notes. They're like, listen, at the end of the day, I don't want to be in a fund with a bunch of other investors. I am very comfortable foreclosing if I have to. And I would just much rather be the only person in it. So again, you just really have to decide where you fit into this. I still think alternative investments are a great option. They can provide really good returns. They're not correlated to the public markets. Obviously, they are correlated to the real estate markets. So, you know, providing you're doing your due diligence as a private lender and you're understanding what the value is of the asset you're lending against, or if you're in a fund, obviously you want to align yourself with somebody that has a great track record, that's been around, that's been doing it for a while. You can get great returns providing you do your due diligence on that. And they can also provide great income. You know, we have a lot of clients that have retired, sold businesses that are living off their cash flow. We love to see that. They're out vacationing, they're letting their money work for them. We report to them and everything's great. All right, so private lending, again, we're gonna just kind of touch base on this again. I know I talked a little bit about this just in the previous slide, but direct private lending, again, this is where you are the lender. You know, why investors like it? It's contractual returns. Again, remember I said, when you lend money or you go into a fund, you know, the terms of either of those investments should be clearly defined. What is the return you're getting? How is it paid? When is it paid? And when do you get your money back? A lot of times with private lending, it's shorter duration. So for example, our typical note is only 12 months. So these, at least for central lending, are not long-term notes. There is a whole nother strategy for that. I know a whole group of people that buy owner-occupied notes. That's another conversation. Those are typically 30-year paper notes. I'm happy to connect you with them if that's something you're looking for. But what we're talking about is non-owner occupied lending. And so we are what is considered a bridge lender. We come in, we help a borrower that needs funding to buy the property, sometimes also to rehab the property, and they're typically going to pay us off by refinancing the loan or selling the property. Investors also like private private credit because there is collateral backing the loan, and they can have predictable income streams. So position this as a portfolio complement, not a replacement. Like I tell people, I wouldn't put all your eggs in the traditional investment world, and I'm not expecting you guys to do this in the alternative space either. This is just something to diversify what you guys might already have. So here's a few mistakes that we see, and it's interesting. I have one very good client that I've been working with for a long time, and he tells the story. When I first met him, he found out I was selling notes through a friend or a neighbor. And so I met him, and he was doing what I call chasing returns. And I told him, I said, don't chase returns. You know, he was looking at deals where these people were promising him, 15 to 20% and all these things. And I told him, like, you cannot get that in. You got to get that out of your head. And he got burned a couple times, and he came back and he said, I did what you told me not to do. I chased returns. And he ended up foreclosing, and he was fine. He came out whole. But don't chase returns. I mentioned this earlier tonight. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. Can you go buy a note and get paid 15 to 20%? Probably. It's probably not a great borrower. It's probably potentially going to be a headache for you to collect on. Boring is okay. So do not chase returns. I also have seen this recently, overconcentration in one asset class. And this could be anything. You could have too much in debt funds. You could have too much in oil and gas. You could have too much in commercial, self-storage, multifamily. I wouldn't suggest putting everything in one asset class for anybody. We actually had a client 2 years ago that came to us. He had sold a commercial property, and this is a true story at Central Lending. He flew in from Texas because he had this large amount of capital, it was multi-millions of dollars, and he wanted to just put it with one operator. And we all told him, that is a really bad idea. Why don't you put some with us, some with another operator? No, I don't want to manage that. I want it all with one. He didn't end up investing with us. And we were very open and transparent about the fact that we didn't like the idea of him just putting all of his capital with us. I wouldn't do that with my own capital. I would not suggest anybody else do that. Would I like to raise a bunch of money? Absolutely. That's my job. But I would never encourage somebody to do that. So don't put too much in one asset class, because the other thing with real estate is when commercial is up, residential is usually down, and vice versa. It's really important to diversify. Also, planning mistake I hear from a lot of people is ignoring income needs. I talked about that earlier. Like, sit down and determine, if you really are trying to create cash flow, what your income needs are going to be. Typically once you retire, you don't have kids that you're supporting. A lot of times your expenses go down, not always, but many times. But I think we're all kind of, guilty of this. Once you get to a level of income and you're comfortable, you probably don't look at it as often as you should in budget, because you don't really have to. And so a lot of times I've heard from people, like, we actually sat down and wrote out our expenses and we were shocked. So understand what your income needs really are. Letting taxes drive all decisions. And the last one would be no rebalancing plan. So here's kind of a simple framework for yourself to ask. What roles does this investment play? And again, I talked about this. Are you investing, what kind of dollars? So that also segues into number two. Is it income growth or stability? I think number two also can be dictated by the kind of dollars you're investing. Are these IRA dollars? Are you trying to create cash flow? What is your age? Are you still working? Do you have W-2 income coming in? And obviously, stability is always important. How does this investment perform in different market cycles? That's a conversation to have too. Right now, we're seeing in the residential market some areas that are really struggling. I mean, we are located in Florida, and the Florida market is soft right now. They're saying New York is in big trouble. California is struggling. So, how does that asset perform in those market cycles? It doesn't mean you can't, and I'm just using lending as an example. It doesn't mean we can't lend in those areas, but it's something we look at internally. Okay, well, the market is soft. There's insurance issues in the Florida market. Does it still make sense to lend there? And if it does, what does that look like? Maybe we originally were lending at 70% loan to value. Well, now the market's softening. Maybe it makes sense to pull back. I'm not saying we're doing that, but I'm just saying those are things to think about, and if you are investing in a fund with an operator, do they think about those things? Do they look at those things? I had this conversation with an investor yesterday. And those things that we look at every day, and if you are trying to lend your own money and you're starting to see borrowers not being able to pay you off and asking for refinances or extensions on their loans, and it's all in one specific market, you might start to look at that market. So market cycles are important to pay attention to. And how liquid does this capital need to be? I've had investors invest in investments, specifically like syndications, which are great, and there can be really good returns. But they typically tie up your capital for most of the time about 5 years, not always. And they've made comments to me, well, I wanted to put this money there for a couple of years. One of my kids is going to college in 2 years. I'm going to need access to that. And they didn't realize that their capital was tied up for 5 years. You're not getting out. So understand when you're going to need access to the capital, and make sure that whichever investment you are looking at, you have the ability to access that capital when you need it. Because, again, don't chase yield. A lot of people get all stars in their eyes when, I can get 20% returns. Well, that's great, but your 20% returns probably aren't coming for 4 or 5 years. So understand how liquid your capital has to be. And I think if you can kind of follow this framework and some of the questions we've been talking about to ask, you'll make good choices for your investment dollars. So what does it mean to move into the new year with confidence? Clarity creates confidence. So get clear, ask yourself the questions we talked about, put that framework together. So get real clear on what you're trying to accomplish. Be intentional. Structure, or having an intentional structure, reduces stress. Not really knowing and just kind of firing from the hip and spraying and praying, it creates a lot of stress. Diversification creates resilience. I can't stress diversification enough. And income creates optionality. The goal isn't to predict markets, it's to be prepared for them. I hear this all the time. I was listening to a podcast yesterday. You can't time the markets. So just be prepared. Markets will change. Final thoughts. Start with goals and not products. Again, get your framework set. Build balance and not extremes. Revisit your strategy regularly. I mean, at minimum, every quarter, you should be looking at this, if not more often. And then make sure every investment has a purpose. So, few things here. If you want to learn more about what we do, or you have other things you want to talk about, the QR code is up here. You can schedule a call with me. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes. So for those of you folks that are on live, I'm happy to answer some questions. We are recording this, so we will send a recording out of this. But again, I'm always happy to jump on a call and discuss things further. I always feel like these presentations go so fast, and I prepare for these and I have all these thoughts and things I want to talk about, and an hour goes by just crazy fast. I want to see, did we put, okay, it's not on here. Can someone from the team put a QR code up for our investor summit? So in April, for those of you that are listening, we have an investor summit. This is going to be, and I'm going to pull the date up for you guys. I thought we had a slide for this, but it doesn't look like it got put on there. We have what we call our investor summit. Some of you that are on here might have attended last year. It was awesome. So this is an opportunity where you can actually come see us at our corporate office in Lakeland, Florida. And you get to see behind the curtain. You're going to get to meet the team. We're going to have 2 days of people presenting. We're going to have somebody from a self-directed IRA custodian. And this is not just for investors. This is for borrowers and brokers. Last year, it was really specifically designed around our investors, our passive investors, but we decided to open this up. We're pretty excited about this. It went off really well last year, and this year is going to be even better. This is going to be an opportunity for you guys to network. You're going to get to meet our team. You're going to learn how we underwrite a file, how we service a file, how we manage our funds. It's going to be a great time. Hopefully someone, there we go. Let's see here. Can they all see that? I think you guys can see. April 15th through the 17th. This is our 2026 summit. There's no charge for you guys. We want you to attend. We want to bring value to you guys. We're going to feed you. And again, it just was such a great time last year, and this year is going to be even better. If you guys want to attend, the QR code is up there. Seats are limited, though. We don't have a huge space. And my goal is this year, it's so big that in 2027, we're going to have it actually somewhere else. We'll do it in Lakeland. But my goal would be that we have to find a ballroom, because I just see big value in this. Communities are very powerful, and that's what we're trying to build here. So again, if you want to attend, please let us know. We're going to have limited space, so it's going to be a first come, first serve basis on Wednesday, which is the 15th. We're going to have a cocktail and networking event at Lone Palm Golf Course. If you guys are golf fanatics, let us know. We'll get you signed up for golf. We're going to play a little pickleball. I better start practicing. And then the 16th and the 17th is going to be at our office. And you guys, again, are going to get to meet the team. We're going to have some people presenting. Someone's going to give us a market update, one of the financial advisors we work with in Lakeland. Again, we're going to have a self-directed IRA custodian there. We're going to have Chris Miles from Money Ripples. This is an investment community that can help you strategize, put a blueprint together for your investment goals. And then we've got some others. We're not going to release the other ones yet because we haven't confirmed those. But again, we want you to be there. If you're interested, make sure you follow the QR code and reserve a spot, because seats are limited to some extent. But I appreciate you all being here. I know for a lot of you folks, this is the evening for you, and you took time away from your family to be here. But we're really passionate about the alternative investment space. And I believe there's a place in everybody's portfolio for it. And I also believe that it's a great way to create wealth as well as cash flow. So if you'd like to talk more about it, again, the QR code is up there. I saw somebody already booked. That's so exciting. I just got the notification on my phone. But we're happy to talk to you. There's no obligation. We're not trying to, you're not going to get a big sales pitch. I'm happy to educate you with what I know. But again, these are your hard-earned dollars, and it's, you have a responsibility to yourself and your investment dollars to do your due diligence. I encourage people also, if you have questions about, tax implications that this can create and other things like that, please consult with your professionals about that. But always happy to talk. So until next time, everybody, God bless and take care. And we'd love to see you at the event in April.